The heavy, humid air of a Georgia August clung to Jordan Davis as she finally killed the engine of her beat-up Honda Civic. It was 3:15 a.m. The sprawling Oak Creek apartment complex was a sea of silent, dark windows, a stark contrast to the controlled chaos of the emergency room she'd just left. After a 12-hour shift as a nurse, every bone in her body ached for the embrace of her bed. All she wanted was to slip into the second-floor apartment she shared with Kira Hayes, kick off her scrubs, and fall into a dreamless sleep. But as she trudged up the creaking wooden stairs, a sound from inside her own apartment stopped her cold. It wasn't loud. It was a murmur, a low, urgent whisper that slithered through the cheap wood of the front door. It was followed by a dull thud, like a heavy book dropping onto the carpet. Jordan froze, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Kira must have company. Maybe that guy from her art class was over again. Kira was intensely private about her dating life, and the last thing Jordan wanted was to walk in on something. Annoyed but respectful, she turned around, went back down the stairs, and slumped into the driver's seat of her car. She'd give them 15 minutes, a small, considerate act that would haunt her for the rest of her life. That brief delay, meant as a kindness, may have saved her own life, but it sealed the fate of her best friend. Exactly 15 minutes later, she tried again. This time, the apartment was silent. Too silent. A prickle of unease traced its way up her spine as she turned the key in the lock. The moment the door swung inward, the smell hit her. It wasn't the familiar scent of Kira's lavender incense or leftover takeout. It was antiseptic and sharp, the acrid bite of bleach, so strong it made her eyes water. Underneath it was something else, something heavier and coppery, a smell she knew all too well from the ER, the smell of blood. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Kira!" she called out, her voice a reedy whisper. The living room was neat, almost unnaturally so. A single decorative pillow was on the floor, and a stack of magazines was slightly askew on the coffee table. It didn't look robbed, it looked staged, wrong. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get out, but her feet were leaden weights, pulling her deeper into the suffocating silence. The trail of wrongness led her down the short hallway toward Kira's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning her. The chemical smell was stronger here. With a trembling hand, she pushed the door open. The first thing she saw was the floor. It was clean, too clean. Wiped down, but not perfectly. Swirl marks were visible in the low light from the hallway, faint, ghostly patterns on the dark laminate. And then her eyes adjusted, and she saw her. Kira Hayes was lying on the floor next to her bed, curled into a fetal position, as if trying to protect herself. Her vibrant, artistic spirit, the girl who could find beauty in a cracked sidewalk, was gone. Her dark hair was matted and wet, and a dark, sticky pool was spreading out from beneath her head, a gruesome halo against the unnaturally clean floor. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. Jordan didn't scream. No sound came out. Her mind simply shut down, a self-preservation mechanism against a reality too horrific to process. She saw the empty space on the bedside table where Kira's prized possession, a heavy crystal statue she'd won at a student art show, was supposed to be. It was gone. In its place, there was only a void. The world tilted on its axis, and Jordan fumbled for her phone, her fingers numb and clumsy as she dialed 3 numbers that would change everything. 911. Detective Frank Gallagher stepped under the yellow tape, the familiar motion feeling as routine as tying his shoes. At 50, with 25 years on the force, the suburbs of Atlanta had shown him every shade of human darkness. He was tired, the humidity was already oppressive, and the swarm of uniforms, flashing lights, and nosy neighbors did little to improve his mood. "What do we got?" he grunted to a young patrolman standing guard. "Female 22, Kira Hayes," the officer recited from his notepad. "Roommate found her about an hour ago when she got home from her night shift. Blunt force trauma to the head. Looks like a robbery gone bad, sir. Place is a little tossed." Gallagher nodded, his gaze sweeping over the low-income apartment complex. It was a transient place, lots of people coming and going. A little tossed, in a neighborhood like this, usually meant a desperate junkie looking for a quick score. It was a sad, simple, and tragically common story. He pulled on a pair of latex gloves and headed upstairs, his mind already piecing together a narrative he'd seen a dozen times before. But the moment he stepped inside apartment 2B, that narrative began to crumble. The air still reeked of bleach. The living room wasn't tossed. It was curated chaos. A lamp was tipped over, but its cord was neatly coiled. Books were pulled from a shelf, but they lay in a tidy pile. It was a theatrical mess, designed to give an impression, not the result of a frantic search for valuables. "Forensics on that bleach smell?" he called out. "All over the place," a voice from the bedroom replied. "Killer was a neat freak." Gallagher walked down the hall and stood at the doorway of the bedroom, letting the crime scene technicians do their work. The victim lay under the harsh glare of their portable lights. He'd seen worse, much worse, but the clinical cleanliness of the scene made the violence of her death feel even more obscene. It was a deep polarization, the brutal, intimate act of murder, set against a backdrop of meticulous, almost obsessive-compulsive sanitation. He watched the text dust for prints, knowing they'd likely find nothing but smudges. The killer had worn gloves and wiped the place down. This wasn't a junkie. This was someone with foresight. As he was observing the scene, a commotion started downstairs. A woman's voice, thick with panic, was trying to push past the uniformed officer at the tape. "That's my cousin's apartment. You have to let me through. Is Kira okay?" Gallagher sighed and went to the top of the stairs. "Let her through, but keep her down here," he commanded. A tall, impeccably dressed black woman in her mid-30s was escorted into the building's entryway. Her face, framed by a sharp, professional haircut, was a mask of anguish. Tears streamed down her cheeks, smudging her perfect makeup. "I'm Valerie Bishop," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm Kira's cousin. A neighbor called me. Please, tell me she's all right." "I'm Detective Gallagher," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Ma'am, I'm very sorry. Kira has passed away." Valerie collapsed against the wall, a gut-wrenching sob tearing from her chest. Her grief was palpable, a raw, physical force that filled the small space. She was the very picture of a devastated loved one. Gallagher gave her a moment before gently starting his questions. When was the last time she'd seen Kira? Did Kira have any enemies? Any boyfriends? "No enemies," Valerie sobbed, wiping her eyes. "Everyone loved Kira. But there was one person, my ex-husband, Terrence Shaw. He has a violent temper. He and Kira had a fight a few weeks ago. He threatened her. He told her to stay out of his business." The information was delivered between heaving breaths, a perfect breadcrumb trail for a detective looking for an easy answer. And in that moment, Gallagher, weary and wanting a simple solution, decided to follow it. The name Terrence Shaw immediately set off alarms in the police database, and with it, a sense of grim satisfaction for Detective Gallagher. 2 priors for assault, a dismissed domestic violence charge involving Valerie, and a string of restraining orders. Terrence was, on paper, the perfect monster for this story. He was a man with a short fuse and a history of using his fists to solve his problems. When a neighbor from the apartment complex confidently picked Terrence's mugshot out of a photo lineup, identifying him as the man she'd seen arguing with Kira in the parking lot last week, the case felt like it was closing in. "He was yelling at her," the elderly woman recounted, her voice trembling slightly. "Something about staying away from his family. He drove an old, beat-up blue Ford pickup. I remember because it was so loud." It was all Gallagher needed. 2 patrol cars were dispatched to Terrence Shaw's address, a small, run-down house on the other side of the county. They found him in his garage, covered in grease, working on a car engine. The infamous blue Ford pickup was parked in the driveway. He was a large man, with powerful shoulders and hands permanently stained with oil. When the officers told him he needed to come downtown for questioning regarding a homicide, his reaction wasn't surprise or fear. It was pure, unadulterated rage. In the sterile gray interrogation room at the precinct, Terrence was a caged animal. He paced the small space, refusing to sit, his large frame making the room feel even smaller. "This is because of her, isn't it?" he spat, jabbing a finger toward the 2-way mirror. "Valerie, she couldn't wait to point the finger at me." "Sit down, Mr. Shaw," Gallagher said, his voice a flat, unimpressed monotone. "We have a witness who saw you arguing with Kira Hayes. We know you threatened her." "Arguing ain't killing." Terrence slammed his hand on the metal table, making the detective's coffee cup jump. Yeah, I told her to mind her own business. She was filling Valerie's head with nonsense, telling her not to talk to me, not to let me see my own kid. The girl had a big mouth. A mouth you decided to shut for good? Gallagher pushed, leaning forward. Terrence laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. You think I'm that stupid? Look, detective, I know how this looks. I'm a big black man with a record. You've already got me tried and convicted in your head, haven't you? He looked Gallagher square in the eye, and the subtle barb of racism, an accusation of prejudice, hung in the air between them. Gallagher, a white detective in a city grappling with racial tension, felt a familiar flicker of defensive anger. It only hardened his resolve. Where were you last night between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m.? Gallagher asked, ignoring the comment. Where I always am on a Tuesday night. Working, Terrence scoffed. Got a side job at a 24-hour truck depot out on I-20, fixing rigs. I was there all night. Can anyone confirm that? Yeah, Terrence sneered. My boss, 3 other mechanics, and about 50 truckers. Plus, the whole damn place is covered in security cameras. So, unless I can be in 2 places at once, you're wasting your time. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. It was the defiant posture of a man who knew he was being railroaded, but also knew he held a winning hand. For Gallagher, the confident denial only felt like arrogance. He was sure Terrence was lying. The man fit the profile too perfectly. He was the easy answer, the simple evil that made sense of a senseless crime. He just had to break his alibi. Detective Gallagher was a man who trusted his gut, and his gut screamed that Terrence Shaw was a liar. He spent the next several hours convinced that Terrence's alibi was a bluff, a house of cards he could easily topple. He sent the detective out to the truck depot on Interstate 20, expecting a call back about a broken camera or a colluding boss. The call that came, however, dismantled his entire case. It's rock solid, Frank, the detective on the other end of the line said, his voice devoid of excitement. Time-stamped security footage shows Shaw clocking in at 7 p.m. and clocking out at 5 a.m. He's on camera in the repair bay at 10:17, 11:45, 12:30, and 1:52 a.m. I spoke to his supervisor and 2 other guys on the shift. He was there the whole time, wrestling with a busted transmission on a Peterbilt. There's no way he did this. Gallagher hung up the phone, a wave of frustration washing over him. The perfect suspect was no longer a suspect at all. The neat, simple box he'd put the case in had just been blown to pieces. All he had left was a meticulously cleaned crime scene, a missing murder weapon, and a victim with no apparent enemies. He was back at square one, and the paperwork was already piling up. He ordered Terrence Shaw to be released. As Terrence was being uncuffed, he shot Gallagher a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. The rage was gone, replaced by a cold, simmering resentment. Told you, he said, rubbing his wrists. You're free to go, Mr. Shaw, Gallagher said stiffly, refusing to meet his eyes. Yeah, I am, Terrence said, stopping at the door. He turned back, a strange, malicious glint in his eye. But you're still looking for a killer, and you're looking in all the wrong places. If you have information, now's the time to share it, Gallagher said, his patience worn thin. Terrence let out a short, harsh laugh. Information? Yeah, I've got some for you. You're so busy looking at me, the big scary ex-husband. You're not looking at St. Valerie. You should go ask her about her relationship with her dear cousin Kira. He leaned against the doorframe, savoring the moment. They weren't just cousins, detective, not by a long shot. The way Valerie looked at that girl, it was possessive, unnatural. You want to find out who killed Kira? Ask Valerie what happens when her pretty little secret threatens to get out. Gallagher stared at him, his expression hardening. He saw the words for what he believed they were. The pathetic, desperate lashing out of a bitter ex-husband trying to sling mud at the woman who left him. It was a classic tactic. Get out of my station, Shaw, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Terrence just shook his head and walked out, leaving his poisonous words hanging in the sterile air of the precinct. Gallagher dismissed them instantly. A secret lesbian affair? It sounded like something out of a cheap soap opera. It was a distraction, a red herring thrown out of spite. He crumpled up a piece of paper on his desk and threw it in the trash. The polarization in his mind was clear. Terrence was a violent man, and even if he didn't commit this specific crime, his words were just another form of aggression. Valerie, on the other hand, was a grieving victim. He wouldn't dignify Terrence's slander with a second thought. It was a decision, a snap judgment based on prejudice and a desire for simplicity that would cost the investigation precious time. With their only suspect cleared, the investigation stalled. Days turned into a week. Kira Hayes became another face on the local news, another tragic story destined to fade into the background noise of the city.